Ever find yourself looking at something like completely out of place?
Yeah.
Like a lone ski glove.
Yeah.
It's just sitting there in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
And you're like, how in the world did that get there?
Right.
We've got a prehistoric puzzle for you today
Okay.
that's just as baffling. We are diving into the mystery
All right.
of obsidian
Obsidian.
as volcanic glass
Okay.
showing up all across Western Canada,
Oh, wow.
especially in Alberta.
Okay.
Now, geologically speaking,
Yeah.
Alberta is about as far removed from volcanic activity as you can possibly imagine.
I would think so. Yeah.
So how did this volcanic rock end up
Yeah.
scattered across the province?
Yeah. Well, what's so fascinating here from the start is just how widespread these finds are.
Okay.
You know, it's not just a handful of isolated pieces.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking over 500 archaeological sites in Western Canada where obsidian has been discovered.
Okay.
A significant number of those.
Mm-hmm.
285 to be exact.
They're located right here
Yeah.
in the eastern slopes of Alberta.
Okay.
So think about it,
Yeah.
glassy volcanic rock
Yeah.
in a land largely built from layers of sediment.
Yeah.
It immediately tells a story of travel, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these aren't just like pretty souvenirs
Right.
from some, ancient vacation or something.
Yeah.
These obsidian fragments were actually used to make tools, sharp arrowheads, spear points,
Mm-hmm.
clear evidence of human activity.
Absolutely.
And here's where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
This out-of-place obsidian, it's like a breadcrumb trail.
Okay.
It's leading us to understand something much bigger than just a sharp tool. It's a powerful indicator of long-distance trade.
Right.
And this incredible interconnectedness of prehistoric Indigenous populations.
And that's precisely the key insight here.
Yeah.
As Tim Allan, an archaeologist with the Archaeological Survey of Alberta,
points out in his recent study,
mm-hmm.
the presence of obsidian at these Alberta sites is a bona fide indicator, a genuine sign of these ancient trade networks in action. This wasn't just neighbors swapping trinkets.
Right.
It suggests complex and dynamic relationships connecting millions of Indigenous North Americans.
Millions.
Yeah.
That's a scale of connection that's almost hard to grasp for that time.
Yeah.
To think some of these places are incredibly old.
Yeah.
Take GBQN 13, for example. That site dates back roughly 7,000 years.
Wow.
So the question that naturally arises,
Yeah.
our mission for this deep dive is, how on earth did these obsidian artifacts travel hundreds of miles to end up scattered across Alberta?
Well, okay, let's unpack why this is such a head-scratcher.
Okay.
Let's take a look at Alberta's geology.
Okay.
As we kind of touched on.
Yeah.
The ground beneath our feet here is primarily made up of sedimentary rock.
Mm-hmm.
Think layers of compressed sand, silt, and clay.
Okay.
Obsidian, on the other hand, is born from fire.
Okay.
It's formed when molten volcanic lava cools down rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So its very presence here is a strong signal that it originated elsewhere.
Right. Like finding tropical fish.
Exactly.
In a mountain lake.
Uh-huh.
Clearly they didn't
They shouldn't be there.
swim upstream to get there. Yeah.
No.
And the sheer number of these obsidian finds in Alberta,
Right.
over 500 sites across Western Canada, with those 285 in the eastern slopes alone, really highlights how significant this movement of material was.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note that at most of these sites, obsidian makes up a relatively small portion of the total artifacts discovered,
Okay.
usually around 5% or even less.
Which makes our ability to trace it back to its original volcanic source all the more remarkable. And this is where some really clever technology comes into play.
Okay.
The major breakthrough in unraveling this mystery has been the application of X-ray fluorescence, or XRF technology.
XRF.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Right.
How does zapping these ancient tools with X-rays help us figure out their origins?
Think of it like this.
Okay.
Okay. XRF works by sending X-rays into a sample.
Okay.
In this case, a piece of obsidian.
Mm-hmm.
When those X-rays hit the atoms within the obsidian, the atoms respond by emitting their own unique set of X-rays.
Okay.
By analyzing the energy of these emitted X-rays, we can identify exactly which elements are present in the obsidian and in what concentrations.
Wow.
It's like a unique elemental fingerprint.
Okay.
Each volcanic source has a slightly different chemical makeup.
So by analyzing the fingerprint
Right.
of an obsidian arrowhead found in Alberta, we can potentially match it to the fingerprint of a specific volcano hundreds of miles away.
Precisely. And what has really revolutionized this field is the development of portable XRF or PXRF technology. In the past, this kind of detailed chemical analysis was expensive, technically demanding, and often meant sending precious artifacts off to specialized labs. But now with PXRF, researchers can take the equipment directly to the archaeological sites or museum collections. Makes the analysis much more accessible, efficient, and allows for the study of many more artifacts. And, you know, Tim Allan's work has greatly benefited from these advancements.
So that sounds like a game changer for archaeologists.
It is.
Trying to piece together these ancient connections.
Yes.
And this is all part of a bigger ongoing effort, right?
Sure.
The Alberta Obsidian Project.
Exactly. The Alberta Obsidian Project is a long-term research initiative specifically dedicated to finding, analyzing, and cataloging all the obsidian artifacts discovered across the province.
Wow.
So far, they've studied over 1,000 individual pieces.
1,000?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And this systematic approach is vital for building a comprehensive understanding of these ancient trade routes and the scale of these networks.
So, okay, with this amazing elemental fingerprinting technology in hand, what have researchers like Tim Allan and the Alberta Obsidian Project actually discovered about where all this Alberta obsidian came from? Time for the big reveal.
All right. Well, the research has identified 4 primary geological sources that account for the vast majority of obsidian found in Alberta. The most common source, particularly in the eastern slopes, is Bear Gulch, located in Idaho. In fact, obsidian from Bear Gulch has been found at over half, 52.7% of the analyzed sites in that region. And it makes up nearly 2/3.
Wow.
61.8%.
That's huge.
Of all the obsidian artifacts studied from the eastern slopes.
Wow.
So Idaho's a major player in this ancient trade story.
Wow, Idaho.
Yeah.
That's a significant distance.
It is.
What are the other main volcanic contributors to Alberta's prehistoric toolkit?
Well, the second most common source is Obsidian Cliff, which is located in Wyoming. This source appears at about 32% of the eastern slope sites and accounts for roughly 28% of the obsidian artifacts found there. Then we have 2 sources located in British Columbia to the northwest, Anaheim Peak and Mount Edziza.
So we're talking about obsidian-making journeys from Idaho and Wyoming in the south and from British Columbia in the northwest, all converging in Alberta. Some of these artifacts traveled almost 750 miles from where they were formed.
It's amazing.
That's incredible to cover in prehistoric times.
It really highlights the extensive reach of these ancient connections. And as Tim Allan points out, it's highly probable that a single piece of obsidian likely exchanged hands many times as it made its long journey across the landscape. Think of it like a valuable item being passed along through different communities and trading partners.
Like a precious commodity making its way through a network of different people. It really makes you think about the social connections. And perhaps even agreements that must have existed to facilitate this kind of long-distance exchange.
And that naturally leads us to the question of pathways. How did this obsidian actually move across such vast distances? Well, the research suggests that river networks likely play a crucial role, particularly in the northern part of the eastern slopes. These waterways would have served as natural transportation corridors, facilitating east-west travel and trade, connecting different indigenous groups across the landscape.
Makes perfect sense. Rivers as the highways of the past.
Exactly.
What about the southern part of the eastern slopes? Was the distribution of obsidian different there compared to the north?
There's a really interesting pattern that emerges when we look at the southern part of the eastern slopes. Here we see a strong connection between where obsidian is found and the location of bison jumps.
Bison jumps?
These were incredibly important sites for communal bison hunting, where indigenous hunters would strategically guide herds of bison over cliffs
Wow.
providing a large supply of food and other resources for the community.
So they would use the landscape to their advantage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A significant proportion of the obsidian artifacts discovered in this southern region have been found at or in close proximity to these bison jump locations.
So were these bison jumps not just hunting grounds, but also perhaps important gathering places where trade and exchange, including obsidian, might have taken place?
That's precisely what Allan suggests.
Okay.
The distribution of obsidian at these sites appears to be directly linked to these communal hunting practices. When you look at the average distances between obsidian-bearing sites with southern sources, that's Bear Gulch, Obsidian Cliff, and other smaller Idaho sources, and the nearest bison jump. They're remarkably short, often just a few kilometers.
Wow.
This is quite different from the much larger average distance of 106 kilometers when you consider all archaeological sites in the eastern slopes relative to a bison jump. It strongly implies a connection.
That's a really compelling link.
Yeah.
It's almost as if these large gatherings for the communal hunt also created opportunities for the exchange of goods.
Right.
And obsidian, being a valuable and useful material, was part of that exchange.
Yeah.
Were there specific bison jump sites that seem to have been particularly rich in obsidian finds?
Absolutely. Sites like Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump, Archaeological Site Designation, DKPJ1, and Calderwood Buffalo Jump, DKPJ 27 here in Alberta, as well as several well-known bison jump sites in Montana, such as 24GL 759, 24GL 203, and 24A 660, have yielded significant quantities of obsidian.
Wow.
This really reinforces the idea that bison jumps were a central element in the Southern Obsidian Exchange Network.
So it seems we have these two distinct patterns of obsidian distribution, a river-based network, potentially in the north, and a bison jump-centered pattern in the south.
Right.
Was there a clear geographical division between these two?
There does appear to be a regional difference, roughly around the Red Deer River in the eastern slopes. To the south of this river, obsidian originating from those southern Idaho and Wyoming sources.
Is much more prevalent, which aligns with the idea of social gatherings at the bison jumps, facilitating its distribution. To the north of the Red Deer River, obsidian becomes less common overall, perhaps indicating a more infrequent or ephemeral form of trade in that region.
And what about the obsidian that originated in British Columbia in the north? How did that fit into this regional picture of trade?
Interestingly, the obsidian from those northern sources, Anaheim Peak and Mount Adziza, is not often found at the same sites as the obsidian from the southern sources. In fact, within the analyzed data from the eastern slopes, there was only a single instance where both northern and southern obsidian were discovered at the same archaeological site.
Wow.
This might be explained by the challenging terrain of the Rocky Mountains, which could have limited easy east-west movement directly from those northern BC sources.
Potentially making those north-south river routes more significant for that flow of material.
It sounds like different regions had their own primary spheres of interaction and exchange.
Precisely. And while we know that obsidian from Mount Adziza played a significant role in forming alliances and connections along the northwest coast, by the time it reached Alberta, the quantities were smaller, suggesting it had likely passed through multiple hands and perhaps even different exchange networks along the way.
It's like a relay race almost.
Yeah, kind of, The single site we mentioned earlier, Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump DKPJ1, which showed an unusually high diversity of obsidian sources. 5 different varieties in total.
Wow.
Really stands out as a potentially major hub in this ancient exchange system.
That's fascinating.
It is.
It really paints such a vibrant picture of these ancient societies. They weren't isolated groups. They were part of these interconnected communities with established relationships and these long-standing trade routes that spanned hundreds of miles.
Exactly. And as Tim Allan emphasizes, the distribution of this seemingly simple volcanic glass is a tangible reflection of the complex ways of life and the deep interconnectedness of pre-contact Indigenous peoples across this vast landscape.
So let's bring this incredible journey of volcanic glass full circle.
You're right.
We've learned how obsidian, a material not native to Alberta's geology, traveled hundreds of miles through ancient trade networks. Thanks to technologies like portable XRF, researchers have been able to pinpoint its origins in Idaho, Wyoming, and British Columbia. And it seems that bison jumps played a crucial role in distributing southern obsidian, acting almost as social and economic hubs, while river networks likely facilitated movement in the north.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to the end of our deep dive. And it really underscores Tim Allan's important point. Indigenous communities were extremely interconnected prior to European contact and colonization. This research on obsidian is, as he puts it, just scratching the surface of how complex relationships between different groups were. These trade networks. Moving something as identifiable as obsidian across such distances demonstrate a level of social and economic organization. That is truly remarkable.
It is.
And deserves our continued attention and respect.
Absolutely.
It really does make you stop and think, doesn't it?
It does,
If a seemingly ordinary artifact, like a piece of volcanic glass, can reveal such intricate connections, stretching across the continent thousands of years ago, what other stories might be waiting to be uncovered?
Absolutely.
What other seemingly out-of-place objects might hold further clues about the social, political, and cultural landscapes of pre-contact North America? It definitely gives you a profound new perspective on the deep history beneath our feet and how much more we have yet to learn about the interconnectedness of the past.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep on digging.
Absolutely.